In this week's Torah portion of Ki Tavo, we begin with the commandment of first fruits, Bikurim. Chapter 26, verse 11, Then you will rejoice with all the good that God, your God, has granted you and your household, you, the Levite, and the convert who is among you, the ger, the convert. Now, who is this convert? Well, obviously, at the literal level, it just means people who have converted to Judaism. But Rabbi Chaim ibn Attar, who was the illustrious Moroccan 18th century author of the very popular commentary on the Torah, the Ar HaChaim, said as follows, based on the Zohar, based on Jewish Kabbalistic teachings, that this ger is a strange soul who comes to visit you on special occasions when you do an exalted mitzvah, an exalted commandment, connection ritual of the Torah. You see, what happens is that normally your soul is enough to get you by whatever you need to do in life. You don't need any extra souls, any extra energies. But once in a while, when you carry out a particular mitzvah, a particular commandment, who knows what it would be, that's particularly auspicious, God sends you another soul, the ger, the stranger, who comes to help you do that particular act. And that's why the Torah says that sometimes you have this stranger among you, spiritual stranger coming to assist you. Chapter 28, verse 7 says as follows, They will come out against you in one direction and flee from you in 7 directions. This is part of this long section of curses, of rebuke, which we read in the Torah portion, which takes up the large chunk of it, impending punishments for failure to observe the commandments. What does this particular one mean? That they're going to come out against you in one direction and flee from you in 7 directions. Rabbi Levi Isaac Berdichev, who was one of the early leaders of the Hasidic movement, an 18th century figure, said as follows, based on this idea of 7 directions. You see, whenever a Kabbalist sees the number 7, certain alarm bells ring, because we know that Kabbalistically there are 7 faculties of the soul, which are love, fear, compassion, endurance, humility, bonding, and self-expression. Now, of course, you can have hundreds and hundreds of emotions, but the Kabbalists, in their wisdom, rounded down every emotion into general categories. And if you think about it, you'll probably find that most of the emotions that you have actually fit into one of these 7 categories. Now, what is the difference between a stable, healthy personality and a turbulent, dysfunctional one? Says Rabbi Levi Isaac, it's the difference between whether these emotions are harmoniously connected with each other, they are comfortably exchanging with each other, or if they are at tension, if they are at war with each other. For example, take the first 2 emotions of love and fear, which could also be translated as giving and withholding. I mean, imagine someone asks you for some charity. What's your reaction? If you have a very strong impulse to give, that could be a healthy personality. Even if you have a very strong impulse not to give, you're going to be stable. But what if you're torn between both? What if you're torn between a tremendous desire to give and yet a tremendous desire to be frugal and to reserve your funds? Then you're going to be torn. So the difference between the healthy state of mind and the unstable state of mind is really the question of whether these 7 emotions are together or whether they are at conflict with each other. Now let's read the verse again. They will come out against you in one direction. This is talking about the healthy soul. When your soul is in close proximity to God, in other words, it feels connected to God, God's presence has a stabilizing quality. For example, we have this famous idea in the Midrash of each judgment that we suffer being described as a kind of court case, that you have an accusing angel, you have a defending angel, and they're both arguing their case. And what tends to happen, says the Midrash, is that when God walks into the courtroom, this tremendous, overwhelming light of God makes even the prosecuting angel and the defending angel make peace with each other. When the faculties of your soul are distant from God, then they become in conflict with each other. When they feel close to God and connected to God, then the tremendous light of his presence heals those differences and coerces these different faculties to get on with each other. And that is what happens. They will come out against you in one direction. When you're close to God, all seven merge into one. But they will flee from you in seven directions. When you flee from God, when you're distant from him, then you will be plagued by seven powerful feelings tugging you in different directions. So when we fulfill the commandments, the mitzvot, as I've mentioned before many times, that these are not just obligations from God. These are connection rituals. It's a sacred technology which is connecting your soul to God. And that's going to have a harmonizing, stabilizing effect on your soul because it's going to bathe all those seven faculties in the immanent light of God. Now, of course, when we read this long section of rebuke, it's very disturbing and troublesome. Why is God rebuking us so much for failing to observe the commandments? But it's not the first time we've read it. Also in Leviticus, there's a long passage. It's not quite as long as this one, but a similar passage with many lengthy rebukes. And this one here at the end of Deuteronomy is almost a repetition. But it's not exactly a repetition. If you read, get out those two passages, Leviticus and Deuteronomy, the two sections of curses, read them carefully, you will see that the passage in Leviticus is harsher, even though it's shorter, it's harsher than the passage in Deuteronomy. More bitter, harsher curses. Why is that the case? So Rabbi Joseph Karoy explains why these curses in Deuteronomy are less harsh. And he says as follows, that God, Kabbalistically, God has a masculine side, but he also has a feminine side. And the feminine side is softer, less harsh, less condemning. Just as we find that typically women are more softer and compassionate than men. The first 4 books of the Torah represent the masculine side of the Torah. The final book of Deuteronomy is a reflection of the feminine side of the Torah. And therefore, the curses in Leviticus are harsher because they're coming from the male emanation of God rather than these curses in Deuteronomy, which are the female side. A fascinating insight. Now this Shabbat is the 18th of the month of Elul, the Hebrew month of Elul. 18 can also be pronounced Chai in the Hebrew, if we spell it out in Hebrew. Chai El is the birthday of Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. It's also the birthday of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who was the founder of the Chabad movement. So I think it's only appropriate that this week's spiritual exercise should be trying to bring the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, of the Hasidic movement, into our lives. The Baal Shem Tov taught that we should have a passionate Judaism. He used the language of Mesirat Nefesh, giving over your soul. Judaism shouldn't just be this kind of staid thing that we practice because it's a ritual or it's our religion. Something we should be devoted to with all our soul, with all our might. He also taught a compassionate Judaism, because one of the things which he emphasized so much was the idea of loving humanity, loving Jews, loving non-Jews, loving every living creature in this world. And his third most important teaching is the consummate nature of Judaism. Judaism is a complete system. It embraces our whole life. God, the presence of God, should embrace and be present in all your life. The Baal Shem Tov taught that everything that happens to you is a lesson in your relationship with God. There's no such thing as events in your life existing outside that orbit. Everything is part of that palpable experience of the divine in your life. So remember those 3 things. to have a passionate Judaism, to have a compassionate Judaism, and to see God's presence as something consummate in your life. Thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing you next week for Torah in 10.